March, we were conducting the programs as webinars. I know all of you might have intoxicated with webinar links, webinar messages. Maybe you may be receiving around 20 to 30 webinar links on daily basis. But whatever said and done, there is no way out. This is the only way through which we can conduct our monthly programs and in future the annual programs as well, because there is no sign of the disease coming down in the near future. So this month we are so grateful to Samarth Life Sciences and Dr. Kuldeep Jain, who facilitated this meeting, this monthly meeting for us, and that is about demystifying PCOS. For this, we have two very wonderful speakers. One is our own Dr. Kuldeep Jain, and about whom just a few words. He's a senior IVF specialist at KJ IVF Delhi, and he has more than 30 years of teaching experience, and he has been trained in ART and endoscopy from Singapore, and he has been instrumental in starting many of the academic programs as he was the founder secretary of Indian Fertility Society. The fellowship programs in embryology, fellowship programs in clinical reproductive medicine. Also, he has facilitated the program along with Amity University. And he has also served for so many years in various positions in FOXI. Especially the remarkable one was the FOXI Endometriosis Society chairperson. And he has been associated with ESTRE for conducting a joint conference in India. Unfortunately, that has been postponed to next year in the background of COVID scenario. And at last, somebody has muted me. So he will be our candidate for vice president for the coming FOXI election. And I think all our society members have to support such a brilliant academician to come up to that post. And the next speaker is Dr. Venugopal. A detailed introduction about him will be given before his talk, but even though he is a member of Thrissur Society, always we feel that he is a member of our own Pondicherry, this Perinthalmanna Society, because he was so much instrumental in supporting our society right from its inception onwards. So detailed, a brilliant description will come later on. I invite Dr. Wahab to say a few words about our last monthly activities and the forthcoming activities in short. Dr. Wahab, please.
Good morning all. Perinthalmanna Obstetric Gynec Society is actually very active during this lockdown season. We used to conduct at least one seminar each month, but in this lockdown period, we had many webinar series in months, at least 2-3 webinars on each month. So it is a proud moment for us, the Perinthalmanna Obstetric Gynec Society, as a secretary, for myself, on behalf of the Perinthalmanna Obstetric Society. I welcome all of you into this webinar. I am not going to waste much time. We will directly enter into our academic feast, and Kunjumadin will invite sir to start.
Yeah, just a few words about the topic. PCOS, as you all know, it's a very wonderful topic for discussion, because many things are keeping on changing right from the PCOS with adolescents till the menopause period. Lot of different things are happening. Lot of different approaches are coming up. Management, a lot of options, and it's keeping on change day by day. So today we have the first session in this demystifying session on PCOS, the current approach and updates on the management of PCOS. As we already mentioned, we have a very wonderful speaker, Dr. Kuldeep Jain. Sir, over to you. Next 40 minutes is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Kunjumadin, for the introduction and giving me the platform to connect all members of Perimenal Society. It is really a wonderful platform in this difficult time of Corona, when we cannot speak, we cannot conduct the physical CME. Then this is certainly a very good way of connecting with the people and sharing the knowledge and experience. So I thank Dr. Kunjabuddin and Dr. Bahab for having me connected with all the members of your society. And it is really wonderful to be speaking to you on a subject which is very important and very common, and having a lot of dilemmas, even in diagnosis and management. So thank you very much. Uh, Yeah. So I will be speaking on the current management and whatever is the recommendation in PCOS. So demystifying PCOS itself is a topic. Means there are a lot of debates and controversies in the topic, and that's why we have to demystify. Uh, Before I start, I take this opportunity because this is a wonderful opportunity to seek your support and blessing uh, of all society members of Perimuna Option Gynae Society. Uh, I have been working for Foxy for last 34 years, and served Foxy in different posts. Uh, I was endometriosis committee chairperson, Foxy, in 2017 and 2019, and now I am looking for a bigger role in Foxy. In coming election, I am contesting for Vice President Foxy, and I seek support of everyone from your society. Uh, I can assure you that I'll be adding a lot of things which may help all Foxians in coming future. So I seek your blessing and support. Coming on to the topic, this is demystifying PCOS. Some facts about PCOS. As you know, that PCOS is a complex endocrine disorder with increased androgen production and ovulatory dysfunction. And it is supposed to be a leading cause of anovulatory infertility and hirsutism. Uh, it is not only the reproductive age group or adolescent age group. Once the PCOS is diagnosed, it is having long-term consequences, and that's why it is called the lifetime punishment. Uh, as women grow older, there may be hyperlipidemia, type 2 diabetes, metabolic syndrome, cardiovascular disease, and endometrial carcinoma. So you can see the PCOS is not only about the reproduction, it continues to have its problem in later life also. Uh, PCOS actually not limited to any region. Or millions of women are affected with PCOS worldwide. And this is some data from India. 36% of women of reproductive age group are suffering from PCOS. This is data of 2012, and I think figure has not changed, it has just increased. And more than 60% of Indian PCOS, they are obese women. So whenever you see this type of picture, it always comes in mind that this lady must be having infertility along with PCOS. Obesity is actually one of the important part of PCOS characteristic, and it is the central obesity which increases as the severity of the disease increase. It is not only the obesity. These young girls, they are also suffering from PCOS. So it is not only the obesity. 30 to 40% of the PCOS patients, they are lean and thin. And this is the group where the problem is more in diagnosing as well as in managing. As we know that PCOS is combination of familial factor and environmental factor, smoking, lifestyle, stress, and lack of exercise all contributes to the syndrome. Something about clinical presentation of women. As I have told you, it is a disease of lifetime punishment, and we can divide broadly the clinical presentation because they will be different in different age group: adolescent period, reproductive period, and menopause. Uh, Adolescent period, usually they have menstrual irregularities. Cosmetic concerns are always there in adolescent: acne, hirsutism, and hair loss. When it comes to the reproductive group, infertility is the main presenting symptom when the patient comes. Then once they conceive, they can have early pregnancy loss. And during pregnancy, there is high chances of developing PIH and GDM. In menopause, usually the concern are metabolic syndrome and carcinoma endometrium. Obesity is common to all adolescent, reproductive period, and as well as menopause. This is some work which we have done in 2018 at Foxy level, and this is actually very good piece of work, and should be on the table of every gynecologist. This gives a very comprehensive form of algorithm to practice on. So when we talk of PCOS, it is a commonest endocrinopathy, and worldwide prevalence is 5 to 15%. Four phenotypes are identified, and major symptoms are hyperandrogenism, ovulatory dysfunction, and PCO morphology. So this triad is identified very well with PCOS. And I have already highlighted that it can be discussed in three headings: adolescent PCOS, adult PCOS, and perimenopausal. I will not be touching on adolescent PCOS because we are having a wonderful speaker, Venugopal, who will be dealing with the adolescent PCOS. So what I will be doing, discussing the adult PCOS and menopausal or perimenopausal PCOS. Now, adult PCOS can be again two types: the patient who are seeking fertility, and other group is not seeking fertility. So management will change depending on the complaint. Uh, all patients, whether they are in any of the group, they should be diagnosed properly. Investigations, we should know what investigations are required. Then management and long-term consequence follow-up. Something about diagnostic criteria. These are the 2003 Rotterdam Consensus criteria, where out of three, like ultrasound appearance, clinical feature, and biochemical parameters, all three have been taken into account. Oligomenorrhea or anovulation, hyperandrogenism, and PCOS morphology. These three, out of three, if two are present, then one can diagnose the PCOS. A word about AMH. AMH actually is not included in the diagnosis of PCOS in adult and adolescent women. And this is grade A recommendation. Ultrasound characteristics are there. They have been very well defined. So at least one of the following should be there: 20 or more follicles of 2 to 9 millimeter on the basic scan, that is day 2 scan. Increased ovarian volume is again a criteria, and if there is one follicle more than 10 millimeter, then scan should be repeated in the next cycle, because the ovary should be sleeping when you are assessing the AFC. The distribution of follicle, description of stroma, like volume and echogenicity, are not required for the diagnosis. So when you are having multiple follicles in a large ovary, that is sufficient. Again, coming back to the PCOS tree, Adolescent PCOS, I am not going into the discussion because it will be taken care of by Dr. Benu. But I will just like to highlight here, all three criteria are recommended to be present when we diagnose adolescent. And again, minimum 5 biochemical parameters should be there, which to test. Rest of the thing, I think I'm just leaving here. Now, how does lifestyle modification help in management of PCOS? Because that always comes, whether it is adolescent PCOS, adult PCOS, or otherwise. Lifestyle, because it is supposed to be a lifestyle disorder, and that's why there is a lot of discussion about the lifestyle modification in the management. Effect of lifestyle modification, if you see, there are a lot of reports which have suggested that modest weight loss up to 7 to 10% can restore ovulation in 25% of women. So only lifestyle modification or weight loss can restore ovulation in these patients. So that is a very important information, and all patients, they need to be counseled about this. And then even increased pregnancy rate was reported with the weight loss. Miscarriage rate, again, they are decreased by weight loss regimes. And it is not only the restoring ovulation or the decreasing the miscarriage rate. Psychologically, patient feels very nicely, and there is improved psychological parameter, self-esteem, anxiety, and mean depression score. So this is the bonus point when the patient is having working for lifestyle modifications. It can be in any form of aerobic exercise. So one should give a large basket to the patient when we are discussing the lifestyle modification. You should give lot of alternative to the patient. And of course, yoga, quitting the smoking, eating good healthy food, and exercise. So all comes, it should be a package basically when we counsel the patient for lifestyle modification. There are a lot of PCOS diet plan which are available, so patient can actually suggest it that they go on the various websites on diet, and they can choose their own diet as far as the dietary habits are concerned. Now, coming back onto the this is again adolescent management. I'm leaving it here. One thing, cosmetic treatment, because most of these patients, whether they are adolescent or reproductive age group, they are having a lot of hirsutism, and that affects psychologically. They are very stressful, and so cosmetic treatment, local treatment is justified in this patient, along with what we call the medicinal treatment. Coming on to the adult PCOS, there are two groups. One is seeking fertility and other is not seeking fertility. So, as far as the diagnosis is concerned, I have already told you that Rotterdam criteria are to be applied for diagnosis. Along with the Rotterdam criteria, biochemical determinants of testosterone, that is again grade A evidence. AMH is not included in the diagnosis, so it is a grade B evidence. It can be done for the prognostication and for purpose of the counseling and for management when it comes to the stimulation. 17 OHP needs to be done in cases of obese patient and Hirschsprungs. All patients can be given a progesterone withdrawal bleed to diagnose. So if the patient is coming to you with the history of amenorrhea, because these patients, they continue to have missing the period, and if they are responsive to progesterone withdrawal bleed, that is again a diagnostic test for the working uterus. Then, of course, OGTT and lipid profile should be the part of investigation program. Now, patients who are seeking infertility, preconception counseling is very, very important part of the management. So all patients, they need to be positively counseled. There should not be any negative counseling, because once the negative counseling comes in, it harms more than the benefit. So positive counseling is required. It is basically identification of the long-term risk factor affecting fertility and the treatment. Regarding diet, regarding lifestyle modifications, cessation of smoking, and folic acid intake. So that is all part of the preconception counseling. And they should be counseled for a long treatment because sometimes they need to continue the treatment for a longer period. So all side effects, success rate, etc. should be discussed. Now coming on to lifestyle modification, the targeted weight reduction of at least 5 to 10% is suggested, and this is grade A evidence. What do we mean by calorie restriction? It is 500 calories are restricted, and physical activity of 60 minutes per day, along with control of other factors, has been suggested in these patients. The age-related decline in fertility should be given appropriate consideration. So it is not only lifestyle management. If the patient is growing older, then patient needs to be counseled. And all obese patients, they like more than BMI more than 35, they can be given the anti-obesity drug for 3 months before starting the treatment. And if the BMI is more than 50, it is a second line. In more than 50, it is first line. Bariatric surgery is recommended as a first line management in even in fertile patients. And if BMI is more than 35, then it becomes a second line suggestion. Patients who are not seeking fertility, again, lifestyle modification is common to all groups. Identification of metabolic syndrome. So if the patient is having history of hypertension, diabetes, or they are at high risk, this should be identified. And menstrual irregularities can be treated in adolescents. And regular follow-up for metabolic syndrome and carcinoma, this is suggested. Coming on to ovulation induction in reproductive age group, we are having medical management to start with, and clomiphene citrate is one drug which is supposed to be first line for ovulation induction, but recently by most of the recommendation it has been replaced by letrozole as first line. So if you are giving clomiphene citrate, there is no problem there, but you should know the problem with clomiphene citrate like CC failure and CC resistance is there. So that's why letrozole has become more popular because it gives a best response in non-obese PCOS and patients who are having hypersecretion of LH. Then it is again recommended in CC failure and gonadotropin failure. So basically it has become first line drug in all PCOS. If the patient is not responding to your letrozole, then of course either you have to move on to the gonadotropin or a second line management in the form of surgical. Now this is not a surgical management, is not a first line management in any of the condition, and it is recommended only in those patients where you are having hyper LH secretion, lean patient, CC resistance patient. Then it could be a mode of treatment vis-a-vis gonadotropin. and it is basically grade B recommendation. So one has to decide whether the patient should go for gonadotropin or for uh, surgical management. Now, a word about letrozole. How letrozole is different from clomiphene? It mimics the clomiphene citrate without depleting the estrogen receptor. So that is the advantage, and that's why it promotes monofollicular growth. And there is increased sensitivity to FSH also. This is our experience with letrozole, a combination with letrozole and FSH and gonadotropin. And here you can see with letrozole, the cancellation rate again are quite high. But when you combine letrozole with gonadotropin, you can reduce the dose of gonadotropin, and at the same time you can get pregnancy rate almost similar to gonadotropin. So this is one protocol which is quite acceptable and good in cases where the oral ovulations are failing and you don't want to use gonadotropin. Now, when we talk of gonadotropin, which protocol needs to be used in PCOS? Because all these patients, they are at very high risk of ovarian hyperstimulation. So one needs to be very careful when you are starting gonadotropin stimulation in PCOS. It is always suggested that you should start with a very low dose and move into the titrating the dose as you advance. But most of us have seen that using this chronic low dose stepper protocol takes a lot of time. Sometimes it becomes very lengthy. So most of us use modified low dose step-up program, where instead of 7 days gap, we can have 3 to 5 days gap before we start the increment of dose. So one can start with 75 and look for the selection of follicle every 3 days and increase the dose accordingly, according to the response. So this protocol has actually worked in decreasing the ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome without decreasing the pregnancy. This is another protocol which is quite good. When you don't want to use gonadotropin alone, you can start clomiphene citrate or letrozole 5 mg and then add gonadotropin on day 7 and continue this till you get a desired result. This is very effective in resistant cases. So if you are having a resistant case which is not responding to your CC or letrozole, you can always add a little bit of gonadotropin on 7th day and then continue. This requires less gonadotropin. It becomes very cost effective. It provides better endometrial growth even in CC cycle, and comparable conception rate can be got. This is supposed to be ideal protocol, but not usually workable in all situations. So start with letrozole, add FSH, and go on increasing till you get a desired response, and add antagonist. Normally, the antagonist is not required, but for ideal situation where you are giving a agonist protocol to reduce the chances of ovarian hyperstimulation. But how far we can practice this, because once you are giving agonist trigger, the implantation rates are decreased. So this is one protocol which is quite good when you are going for ART. But for normal induction, it may not be very good protocol. So another problem is the high LH. So there you can give combined OCPs as a pre-treatment before you start. And that is one recommendation, which is grade B recommendation, to decrease the high LH and increase the FSH sensitivity. Then there are a lot of other alternative treatments like myoinositol, insulin sensitizer, and melatonin and acetylcysteine. At present, there are only a few studies addressing their role in infertility associated with PCOS. We require more data. They are always used as adjuvant. Uh, then gonadotropin is second line treatment, and if they don't work, then you have to go for IUI. If IUI patient doesn't conceive, then you have to move on to the ART. So these are the recommendations, and once if one keep them in mind, then the management of PCOS in for infertility becomes less tedious and more productive. A word about insulin sensitizer or other adjuvants like inositol and melatonin. These are some of the drugs which have been suggested in PCOS, myoinositol and D-chiroinositol combination, and acetylcysteine, vitamin D3, and other antioxidants. They have emerged as a novel pharmaceutical to improve IVF outcome for the treatment of infertility. At present, there are only few studies addressing their role, so one should be very cautious when they are using. Myoinositol, it promotes ovulation. It is a better insulin sensitizer than metformin. It improves insulin sensitivity, leads to weight reduction, improve in dyslipidemia, reduction in LDL cholesterol, and it may help in treatment of hirsutism and acne also. So it is having a lot of action. And if you compare myoinositol versus metformin, this is the one study. It can be used as first-line treatment as adjuvant in place of metformin. Recommendations are for both, whether you use myoinositol or metformin. Efficacy-wise, there is little marginal difference when you take myoinositol versus metformin. Spontaneous ovulation was seen in 65% of the patients, pregnancy rate 48%, so slightly higher here, and miscarriage rate also slightly lower. The best part is the compliance is very good. It is having minimal side effect. So myoinositol basically scores over metformin when we talk of tolerance. Metformin patients usually they are having a lot of compliance problems. So in short, this is the consensus which was by SRA and SRM. First line is always clomipene citrate. Now this will change. Move on to gonadotropin or LOS, and then move on to IUI or IVF. Coming on to the perimenopausal and menopausal PCOS, this is a difficult group. Diagnosis is always difficult. At least two criteria must be present. And PCOM morphology, usually it is not seen, but if it is seen at that age, then it can add to the diagnosis. Investigation also are slightly different. OGTT is must, lipid profile is must, total testosterone, then carotid intima thickness should be measured, thyroid profile, and of course TBS is very important tool to exclude the endometrial carcinoma and hyperplasia. Management in these patients, lifestyle modification is part of it. Insulin sensitizer and adjuvants are to be given. Perimenopausal women with menstrual irregularities have to be treated like any other adult, and it requires multidisciplinary approach when you are dealing with metabolic syndrome. So blood pressure monitoring yearly in non-hypertensive PCOS, OGTT every year in non-diabetic normal PCOS. If you find abnormal GTT, then as per requirement, you have to repeat and suggest the treatment. And then cardiovascular risk not to be done routinely in absence of any other high risk factor or family history. But one should be looking for carotid intima thickness and blood pressure regularly. This is a recent meta-analysis of 2017 looking at the 9 ovulation induction therapy and what works best for PCOS. And they have come with a recommendation that HMG or gonadotropin therapy results in higher pregnancy rate than any other treatment. Pregnancy, live-birth, and ovulation rates were significantly higher in metformin plus letrozole and FSH group than clomiphene citrate group. So, and then metformin and letrozole is also more effective in improving reproductive outcome. So they suggested gonadotropin along with metformin or in combination for induction. Long-term consequence of PCOS, I have already told you, all patients, they are at high risk of several traditional risk factors of CVD, obesity, hypertension, dyslipidemia, and obesity. They should be looked for all these problems and counseled accordingly. There is increased risk of endometrial cancer and more likely to have depressive symptoms when they grow older. This is my last slide. The recommendation, very recent, 2018. Weight loss followed by clomiphene citrate or aromatase inhibitor is suggested for induction of ovulation. Letrozole as first-line treatment of infertility. Metformin for ovulation induction alone cannot be given. It is not recommended, but it can be used as adjuvant to other ovulatory drugs. Support low-dose FSH becomes cost-effective. Second-line therapy needs to be discussed, and weight loss again is recommended. With this, I thank you all for your patient hearing. If there are any question, I will be happy to take. Over to Kunjumuddin.
Thank you, Dr. Kuldeep Jain. That was a very wonderful session, wonderful talk regarding all about the approaches and different types of management of PCOS. As we all know, even though it is very easy to say, it's a very difficult task or from the point of clinicians to achieve many of the targets in PCOS. And here you have a question, sir, regarding the one situation in PCOS. The question is like this: the patient is not getting menstrual period even after lots of withdrawal bleeding. The patient has ultimately undergone IVF, oocytes were retrieved, and the embryos were cryopreserved. So still then the patient is not getting any withdrawal periods. Patient already is, and of course she is not a non-obese PCO. The BMI is absolutely within normal limits, and she had undergone hysteroscopy, and of late the endometrium is around 15 millimeter with vacuolated like areas inside the endometrium. So how should we proceed?
Yeah, what was the endometrial thickness on ultrasound?
It is just written as very thick. So might be around 12-15 millimeter maybe, or 20 millimeter also.
Okay, so usually these patients, they do respond to your progesterone withdrawal bleeding. So these patients, they should be given withdrawal first. And most of the patients, they will have withdrawal because if the endometrium has grown to 12 to 15 millimeter, there is no reason why they should not bleed, because they are already estrogen primed. So if you give progesterone in these patients, they will bleed. If they are not bleeding, then you have to rule out intrauterine or target defect at the endometrial level. So one should go for a hysteroscopy and look for any adhesions, etc. And send the material for yeah. So, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So that is how they need to be managed. The endometrial biopsy should be sent to rule out any endometrial pathology. And then one can, once endometrial hyperplasia is ruled out, then you can prepare the patient for transfer. If there is endometrial hyperplasia, these patients, they require long-term progesterone to reduce the thickness of endometrium before you proceed for transfer?
Actually, it, that follow-up of that history, it is written as the hysteroscopy was done and the endometrial biopsy was done, and it is showing the secretory changes, and also it is mentioned that they have tried multiples of withdrawal bleeding. And the last part of the question is because the ovary is the ovarian volume is high, is there any role of laparoscopic drilling or wedge or something? If there is an intractable thing like that, it is not responding to any of the withdrawal bleedings techniques.
No, there are two parts. One is patient is not having any withdrawal bleeding, and other is for stimulation, whether patient should go for laparoscopic ovarian drilling or for gonadotropin. Is that correct?
Okay.
So as I
yeah, one more question. So what to do if a non-case of PCO does not get withdrawal, means after progesterone, even after 15 days, that you already answered. And what is the progesterone of choice in adolescent females for withdrawal of norethistron or medroxyprogesterone acetate?
I think medroxyprogesterone is preferable over the norethistron, but both can be given. But when you have to choose between two, medroxyprogesterone is the ideal progesterone because it is having less side effects.
And another question is, a patient on antidepressants, obese antidepressants, and who is also an obese PCO, seeking fertility, how to proceed without OC pills, having very irregular cycles, not responding to ovulation induction agents. So what should be the management strategy? Patient is on antidepressants and obese PCO, wants infertility treatment, and what OC pills of choice to regulate the cycles or the ovulation induction of choice, and should we do any additional investigations? And very often we have found that these patients will have high prolactin levels, isn't it?
Yes, yes. So I think these are the patients which are very difficult to counsel as well as difficult to treat, because they are already having some psychological problem added to your PCOS. And as far as the antidepressant is concerned, because more than the drug, they require a lot of counseling. So if the counseling is proper, usually you can withdraw their antidepressant to the minimal. So that should be the aim before starting any treatment, because they have to understand the problem and they should not correlate their depression with the PCOS. So that is one, because they are having low self-esteem, high depressive score, and at the same time they are having the fertility problem. So all needs to be tackled in such a way that the amount of antidepressant during the treatment is very minimal. They can continue to have antidepressant, but many antidepressants, they are contraindicated during the pregnancy. So during treatment, if they conceive, then they have to change. So they should be in continuous counseling with the psychiatrist. That is number one. Before starting the ovulation, as I have told you, the lifestyle modification is important part. And if she is having very high BMI, then your treatment of ovulation induction might fail. So it is better to concentrate on the lifestyle modification since beginning. And then one can start the ovulation induction according to the previous response. If she has already received oral ovulation and not responding, then of course she has to be put on gonadotropin stimulation and plan the treatment accordingly.
And there is a question, Dr. Kuldeep Jain.
Yeah.
I got a question, which they are asking that patient is having two kids, that is para 2 living 2,
Yeah.
in 30-year-old, and she is having polycystic ovary plus menstrual irregularity and abnormal uterine bleeding. Which is the drug? Which are the drugs or set of drugs is best for such sort of patients?
See, usually these patients, they have a high estrogen, and they should all patients should be looked for the presence of endometrial hyperplasia. So all patients, they should be given a withdrawal bleed, and they should be scanned on day 2 or day 3 of cycle. If they are having thin endometrium, you need not to worry about the endometrial hyperplasia, and then they can be put on a combined oral pill for a longer period. If they are having thyroid disorder or prolactin, that should be taken into account for their menstrual irregularity. And if on day 2 there is a high thickness of the endometrium, then a biopsy is recommended to exclude the any changes, and then they should be treated accordingly with progesterone. At least 3 cycles or 4 cycles of progesterone, and then again they should be looked for persistence of endometrial hyperplasia. So that is the line of management for their menstrual irregularity. They can receive progesterone for a longer period to avoid any endometrial hyperplasia.
About the LNG IUCD releasing LNG releasing IUCDs.
Yeah, that can be given. That will act actually both ways. They will be having contraception also, as well as that will take care of endometrial hyperplasia. That is a good option in these cases.
Sir, we know that you do quite a lot of laparoscopies for endometriosis, and being the chairperson, past chairperson of endometriosis committee as well. So, how often you do laparoscopic ovarian drilling for PCO patients? You do or you never do? Or very frequently you are doing?
No, once I go in and the patient is a known case of PCOD, and we are planning for induction, then usually I do the drilling in these patients, but keeping in mind not more than 4 or 5 drills each ovary. And before that, we usually assess the AMH level, because patient was diagnosed as PCOD, was not responding, but over the period the patient the AMH level has come down. Okay, so if AMH level is within the normal range, you may leave. But if the AMH level are also high and patient is young, usually they benefit with the ovarian drilling. So I usually do ovarian drilling when I am going in a PCOD patient for some other cause. It is not a primary treatment for PCOS, but if I am doing laparoscopy for some other reason, then I will do the drilling, especially in those patients who have already received induction and not responding.
Will the age be any criteria before deciding for ovarian drilling? Even if the AMH is high, PCO is there, and LH is high, still not responding to ovulogens. And if she is more than 30 years or 38 years, still, will you advise laparoscopy still then, or you'll straight away advise IVF?
Usually we straightway go for IVF. We usually don't go for ovarian drilling in these patients when they are elderly.
And with regard to obstetric outcome, have you come across the patients with increased incidence of cervical incompetence and increased preterm delivery in patients with PCOS once when they conceive, especially following ART?
Cervical incompetence I have not come across, but certainly PIH, preterm delivery, and the miscarriage, increased rate of miscarriage. These are the complications, and of course diabetes, because these patients, they are more prone to have gestational diabetes during pregnancy. So these are some of the complications. Cervical incompetence I have not come across uh, related to PCOS.
So what?
There is another question.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah, could you then proceed?
Yeah. 7 weeks pregnancy with bilateral PCOS with no cardiac activity, that is missed abortion. Is there any precautions to be explained to the patient if she confirms pregnancy with such bilateral bulky ovaries? And if she has missed abortion, is it advisable to do PCO drilling before the next conception, as she has already received 3 cycles of OCPs and ovulation injections beforehand?
No, as such, there is no indication for ovarian drilling. But if the patient is not responding, having very high LH, then it is one of the indication. Like
here, the question is very short. To be precise, is there any indication for laparoscopic ovarian drilling in a patient where there is previous history of missed abortion with PCOS?
No, not actually. Not actually. You have to control the hormonal milieu by giving the COCs and the metformin, insulin sensitizer. Usually they help when you add in your program. They help in preventing the miscarriage. So I think adjuvant and gonadotropin induction should be sufficient. Ovarian drilling as such to reduce the miscarriage rate is not recommended.
Hello, sir.
Yeah, please.
Yeah. Kuldeep Jain, sir,
Yeah.
there is a question from one of the audience, and what they're asking is, what are the strategies to continue insulin sensitizers like metformin and myonistal in pregnancy? How long you continue and how much you continue? Any advantage or disadvantage?
Yeah, so as I have told you that miscarriage rates are higher, and if the patient is on metformin or insulin sensitizer, they should continue at least till 14 weeks. There is a suggestion if the patient is high risk for GDM, then you can continue it for longer also. But at least up to 14 weeks, they should continue.
So before going to the next session, so patient at 44 years of age presented with menorrhagia. She has already children, para 2, life 2, menorrhagia, severe irregular periods, PCOS, and not responding to any medical treatments, ultimately decided for hysterectomy. She is 44 years age, PCOS, endometrial, thickened endometrium, which is secretory only on biopsy, and decided for hysterectomy. Will you remove ovaries or not?
See, as far as the specific question about the PCOS, usually at 44, 45 years, you can remove ovary. There are 2 schools, basically, which one is they don't remove ovary. And the same will apply to PCOS patients. And there another school that at 44, 45 years, patient is already entered into the menopausal age. So one can remove ovary. So there is no straight answer here. As far as the PCOS ovaries are concerned, one can remove depending on the preference. There not be much difference as such in these patients. Whether you remove ovary, the treatment remains same as in other patients.
Is there any chance of malignancy if we keep the ovaries back? Means increased chance because of PCO?
No, not
that treated ovaries? No.
Yeah, no.
Okay, so the last question is, I think, I don't know whether it has been answered or not. What is the daily dose of myo-inositol? Because I think it's a food supplement. So is there any daily dosage for myo-inositol?
No, daily doses as such are not defined, but certainly the combination ratio is defined in the literature. It is to be in 40:1 ratio when it comes to the D-chiro-inositol versus along with myo-inositol. As such, daily dose is not defined, because there are no dose finding studies available as far as the myonisitol is concerned. So it is coming in the different combination, and that is the problem with these drugs, that though they are effective, but the dose defined studies are not available.
Okay, with that, the questions are over. We have combined many of the questions and put it across the relevant ones. And with that, we'll conclude the first session. Anyway, that's a very wonderful, very informative, excellent lecture. Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. And just reminding all the attendees that sir is standing for Vice President election of Foxy this year. Just remember his name and please vote for him. And he will be very academically supportive to all of us. And especially this program on PCOS is his initiative, and that is being conducted all across India. And sir, best wishes for the election as well as best wishes for the next coming up lecture at 1 p.m. at South India chapter, Chennai chapter, isn't it? Tamil Nadu chapter. Okay.
So best wishes for
Thank you, Kunju. It was really wonderful connecting with all of you. And my best wishes, please stay safe in this difficult time, because jaan hai to jahan hai, life is there. So you should take care of your family and friends. Thank you so much for providing me this platform for connecting with all members. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much. We'll move on to the next session. It is none other than our own Dr. Venugopal. Fondly, we call him as Venu Bro. And before he is sharing his talk, I just to say a few words about him. And he is the current Secretary General of Kerala Federation of Obstetrics and Gynecology. And he's the Chief IVF Consultant and Executive Director at ARMC IVF Thrissur. And he's also the Secretary of IFS Kerala Chapter and the Scientific Coordinator of Hello Tomorrow CME series of Foxy. Hope our members, all of you remember that we had a very wonderful Hello Tomorrow CME which was conducted in January this year. And he's also an environmental activist, I can say. And long before, almost maybe 3-4 years back itself, he used to be instrumental, inspirational force behind Green Conference concepts in Kerala. And he has made it practical by conducting all Kerala congresses at Thrissur and famous Toxicon at Thrissur. And we really had a wonderful fight during the Fertivision 2018 program, because he was very adamant in having all the concepts go green. But we really appreciate that. And now, see, everybody has realized that that's the way of life ahead. And see, he was really a wonderful force of inspiration to conduct so many activities in our society. And we plan to have our annual conference as a real virtual conference, not a webinar, where Dr. Venugopal and Dr. Ambujam Madam are the patrons for that conference. And shortly we'll be releasing the details of that soon. And the topic for discussion is adolescent PCOS. And Dr. Venu, we have forwarded the contacts, this link to a few of the students from nearby colleges. So they also will be attending the YouTube program. So this is very much relevant, not only for the practitioners, but also for the many of the students of adolescent age group. So I think we'll have a very wonderful discussion, active discussion. We can see a lot of slides with a lot of pictures, graphics and all. So over to Dr. Venu for that wonderful session.
Thank you, Kunjumaydeen and Dr. Wahab and Perinalmana Society for the chance to make this presentation. And Kunjumaydeen, that introduction was too long. For the first time, somebody made such a lengthy introduction about me. Thank you very much. Topic of today's, can you see the screen? It's clear?
Yes.
Yeah, very clear.
You can see very clear.
So the topic for today that I am going to speak is a part of what Kuldeep Jain sir just spoke about. It's a subset of that, and that is adolescent PCOS. So what I wish to say is that if you have read the Indian guidelines for PCOS, which was made by the IFS, Dr. Sonia Malik et al. And released I think 3 years before, 3 or 4 years before. It gave the incidence of adolescent PCOS in India has varied between 10% to, they said 36 to 40%. Now that variability, the incidence is there. In some places it's more, in some studies shows less. It's important to understand that the adolescent PCOS offers you a window of opportunity to catch these cases early and then to prevent the long-term consequences of PCOS. So it's a window of opportunity, but more importantly, it's also a double-edged weapon. It is double-edged weapon because when you identify the cases early, then you can prevent long-term reproductive, cardiometabolic, and emotional sequelae. But what happens is that we have to be very prudent over diagnosing adolescent PCOS. There is a lot of incidence of overdiagnosis. And what happens with overdiagnosis is, you should remember that even overdiagnosis is bad because it can, influence the, it can influence the emotional status. Imagine a young adolescent girl being told about PCOS, a lifelong problem. She has to take medicines. So it has a lot of anxiety and unwarranted, unnecessary medications. Suppose you get the diagnosis wrong. So I think we have to be, when we are talking about adolescent PCOS, we have to be spot on regarding the diagnosis, and we have to be very conservative regarding the treatment that we provide. Always think, should we give? That should be the attitude we have towards patients. How do they present? Yeah. So see, all of you are practicing or even students. It's important to understand that adolescent PCOS presents either as acne or cosmetic changes, hirsutism, and that kind of changes in a young lady with or without irregular cycles. Then sometimes, occasionally, the mother brings the daughter because the periods of the daughter are irregular. That's what most commonly happens. That the complaint will be of irregular cycles, and then there'll be this worry regarding what happens if she gets married. Is this going to continue long term? And sometimes, occasionally, what happens is the problem is that now there's nothing complaint, but then what they talk about is weight gain. Suddenly, the periods, everything was okay, but suddenly the daughter has gained weight, and then she's got discoloration on the neck and all this sort of weight gain. So you have three predominant sections. One is regarding the periods, then it's regarding the weight, and one is regarding the physical appearance. So anybody would understand that these are the things that every mother is worried about, every young lady is worried about. So adolescent PCOS is predominantly present in these fashions. Now, as clinicians, there's a dilemma regarding the diagnosis and how to proceed with these cases. What is it is, it's very important, each of these points. We need to understand that there is an overlap between the normal pubertal development and characteristic features of PCOS. Everything we talk about, polycystic ovary, this, that, and then there's an overlap between what is normal and what is abnormal in adolescent girls. It's much more easier in older ladies to get your diagnosis correct. So we should have great caution before diagnosing PCOS in adolescent girls. There's another next problem is, once you think it's PCOS, you want to diagnose, and then there's absence of definitive diagnosis and a lack of definite therapy. See, Kuldeep Jain sir, he dwelt elaborately regarding the different diagnostic features. You should remember that all the studies done and all the criteria for diagnosis of PCOS are for adults. When it comes to adolescents, there's a definitive lack of approved studies. The number of studies are less, and the criteria are applicable to adults, not as much to the adolescents. But however, the risk of associated comorbidities doesn't decrease, it's always there. So as clinicians, when we see a case of a young girl who has come with irregular cycles, we need to answer questions and get the diagnosis right. So half of my talk I'm going to focus on getting the diagnosis correct. See, regarding diagnosis, more than in gynecology textbooks, you will find more of the references in adolescents PCOS, more reference for diagnosis in pediatric journals and pediatric books. Okay, so we will just try to simplify the diagnosis of PCOS by asking ourselves a few questions. Now, first question is that in a young adolescent girl, what are the criteria to say that she's having hyperandrogenism? Some changes may be normal, but when do we say that she's hyperandrogenic? Okay. See, this is many a times we know about the pictures in which they come with acne, and then we know there's a Ferriman Galloway score, And then we know that there's different ways in which you can grade acne. Okay, there's mild acne, there's moderate acne, there's severe acne. What you need to remember is that mild hirsutism should not be considered clinical evidence of hyperandrogenism. Okay, I'm not dwelling into the Ferriman-Galloway score, but the mild score is not indicative of hyperandrogenism. Just remember that it's from moderate onwards that you start thinking about hyperandrogenism. Now, when next is, so it's moderate to severe hirsutism. Okay, and when you are talking about hirsutism, remember about one thing: the hair you're looking about in adult pattern is not the small, tiny, vellus hair. We should be looking at the terminal, thick, curled terminal hair. Okay, let's not make those mistakes. And then even regarding acne, then you have to see acne is there in many of the girls. But which is the acne that is worrisome? Girls with acne which is persistent, poorly responsible to topical dermatology therapy should be evaluated for the presence of hyperandrogenism. See, there's something called mild acne, moderate acne, and there's severe acne. See, again here, it's the moderate to severe ones that you should make you. And then by the time the young adolescent is brought to the gynecologist, many a times the mother would have taken the daughter, the adolescent would have gone to a dermatologist and tried all local remedies for acne. If it persists in spite of all that, then we should think about it. Should be then it should be thinking about our polycystic ovary related hyperandrogenism. Okay. Now the next question is that once you have a clinical suspicion of hyperandrogenism, then what about biochemical? What are the tests we should do, and what is the evidence for biochemical hyperandrogenism? Okay. So now here everybody knows about one, testosterone. Okay, everybody measures testosterone. You should remember two things about measuring testosterone assays. Okay, testosterone assays are difficult to do, and then testosterone assays and results are notoriously unreliable. Okay, unless you are doing this extraction chromatography and that kind of assays. Okay, so the consensus is that hyperandrogenism is see, you should do it in a reliable reference laboratory if you're doing testosterone assays. Okay, but if you have done it in a reliable laboratory, and if it's elevated, and then if the girl has got clinical signs, then it's the clearest support for the presence of hyperandrogenism. But remember, it should be a reliable assay, and then a single androgen level above the mean should not be considered. Okay, you should take care to recheck it. You should always remember, this is not an adult patient, this is an adolescent patient. Once on the basis of this you give a report and tell the patient she has PCOS, then that diagnosis stays with the lady for always. Okay, so you should always think about it. That's about testosterone. Now, so we discussed about clinical hyperandrogenism, we discussed about biochemical hyperandrogenism. Now we are saying that when do we say that an adolescent has got criteria which satisfy our criteria for oligo or anovulation? When do you label? Because we know that after menarche, many of the cycles are anovulatory. That everybody knows, every gynecologist knows. But when do you label it as anovulation to be categorized into polycystic ovary? Okay. So see, these are very important. So when the menstrual intervals shorter than 20 days or greater than 45 days in individuals 2 or more years after menarche, 2 or more years after, that's the gap you're supposed to give. Interval greater than 90 days is an interval greater than 90 days is unusual even in the first year after menarche. Okay, so here is 2 years, that's first year, and then by 2 or 3 years after thelarche, then there's 15 years or 2 to 3 years after thelarche, if there's still no onset of menses and the mother brings a daughter or the adolescent comes to you, regardless of chronological age, then it's considered as diagnosis of PCOS. I think this slide sort of summarizes, this is where we go mostly wrong. That is, just menarche started, a young girl, mother comes running saying that the daughter has got irregular periods, and then we do some sort of a scan, and then we say that, oh, possibly PCOS. So this once you stick to this, it's difficult to remember a bit, but once you stick to this, I think that wrong diagnosis is less likely to happen. So I think this slide is important from our point of view. Now comes our fascination with scan and our PCOM, the morphology as it appears in the ovary. We all love to send our patients for an ultrasound. But when it comes to an adolescent PCOS, the truth is actually you don't need an ultrasound to diagnose it many of the times. And then the criteria regarding PCOM in an adolescent girl are entirely different from the adult. See, If you look at number in adults, we are obsessed that we are counting the number of FNPO, follicle numbers per ovary. Lot of things we do for the adult, but the same doesn't apply for the adolescent PCO. See, these 4 lines are very important. There are no criteria that this many follicles means PCO. There are no. The only area where you may is that if the ovarian volume is more. You have large bulky ovaries, then yeah, maybe, yes, maybe. Then you should not do follicle numbers and try and explain to the patient that because there are so many follicles and this thing, or a multifollicular pattern, you should not say. And then there was a question earlier asked regarding AMH. In the reproductive age group, there may be some role for AMH, but when you're talking about the adolescents, it's 100% down the wire that you should AMH and adolescent PCOS has no connection. So that should be a take-home message that don't have anything to do with your AMH. Now, the next fundamental question that you asked is that, what diagnostic procedures are appropriate? So suppose you have hyperandrogenism, suppose the patient has amenorrhea, and then you think that, hyperandrogenism is there, amenorrhea is there. Is it only an amenorrhea? Is it just PCO or is something else? We have to always remember that all patients, we always do a TSH thyroid estimation and a prolactin estimation. So that's done because when it comes to amenorrhea, those are the 2 things. Now, when it comes to hyperandrogenism as such, I think these are the investigation blocks. You do a 17-hydroxyprogesterone, and then you have a testosterone estimation, sex hormone binding globulin, androstenedione, and DHEA. Now, this is an open slide. The next slide will make things more, little bit more clear for you, is that how we proceed about it. So this is a more practical slide. Okay. So if you ask, somebody asks you which is the commonest differential diagnosis of polycystic ovary, it's non-classical adrenal hyperplasia. Then you think about how to differentiate. That's why you're doing a 17-hydroxyprogesterone. I think you got it very clearly on this slide. So if it is less than 200, you exclude it. More than 200, then diagnose, and then you take it over from there onwards. All the additional investigations are beyond that investigation. If you have high levels of DHEAS, you're thinking about adrenals. Then if you're thinking of adrenals, you're thinking in terms of an adrenal tumor. And to get an adrenal tumor, you need an adrenal CT. Okay. If you think of Cushing syndrome, then you do a DEXA suppression test. If you think of ovarian androgen secreting tumors, then do a total testosterone. If a testosterone is high, more than 200, you're spot on. Think about ovarian and androgen secreting tumors and do an ultrasound. So see, this slide gives you a broad overview and makes you understand that, the previous slide was more important because the previous slide gives you a basic idea of what is to be done. And then from there onwards, you follow up with the investigation. So don't over-investigate unless required. Ultrasound is required, but for these investigations, ultrasound is not required for diagnosis of PCOS in your adolescents. This is very important to understand. Okay. Now, next is many people talk about PCOS and then they say insulin resistance. Now, that's also important to understand that, the gynecologist and the endocrinologist, you ask any endocrinologist and they'll tell you at the heart of PCOS is insulin resistance. Yeah, we also understand that. Okay. But then because insulin resistance is there, you should not run around and try and start testing the patient for serum insulin and, markers which are difficult to do. And technically this, you should know. But then you should understand that when it comes to comorbidities, see, cardiovascular, when it comes to diabetes and all these things, their insulin resistance and hyperinsulinemia could be considered as comorbidity. You should consider the role of detailed investigations regarding insulin resistance. See, these are the few questions. Once you understand the basics of these things correctly, then you can come to the diagnosis, and then the picture for diagnosis looks more very beautifully understood for you. So if in an adolescent, what would I say? That if there is a combination of, remember, it's not one of the both, it is a combination of 1 and 2. 1 is an abnormal uterine bleeding pattern, which is abnormal for age or gynecological age, and which is persistent. And the second one is evidence of hyperandrogenism. That can be biochemical or this. And like I said, that it should be severe clinical evidence or biochemical lab evidence. So you need both. So earlier, Kuldeep sir very nicely described about Rotterdam criteria, which requires two out of the 3 criteria. In adolescence, there is a difference. There is 2, and it's all inclusive. Once you've got this point, you've understood it better. Ultrasound is not recommended in diagnosis under 8 years, and ultrasound is not an absolute essential in a adolescent lady. You need all criteria for the oligoannulation and hyperandrogenism. So I think there should be no ambiguity regarding questions in mind regarding the diagnosis, how you go to hyperandrogenism, how you approach what tests to be done. So once we got this right, I think the clinician is through the major part of it. Because when you come to management, there are three W's in PCOS. What is the three W's is patient has come or patient's relative has come. You need just know three things to know how to manage that. What is bothering the patient, what are her needs, and what are the risks, because you got to counsel this patient. So what's bothering the patient? Give a patient here that is it the periods, is it the acne, or is it the weight? What are the needs? What does she want? And then what are the risks? Because you got to counsel. It's difficult to make a young lady take medicines. Okay, so that's very important. And our goal should be to address her bother and her needs. And our intervention should be always the aim should be to minimize the risks. Whatever the risks are there, we have to minimize those risks. Okay. See, up till now, there was a lacking in the uniformity and guidelines regarding management of PCOD, polycystic syndrome in the adolescents. But thankfully, now in the year 2020, there's a guideline that has come. It's an international evidence-based guideline and has got many of the people who have formulated the adult guidelines. If you know Helena Teeder, she's the lady who was who in Eshrei presented the international guidelines for consensus guidelines for PCOD. So from that same sort of group of people is then another guideline involving endocrinologists, pediatricians, as well as gynecologists. This is very important and it's a very good read. So whenever you get time, I think we should take time out of your practice and read this sort of guidelines, because it's an international evidence-based guideline. And what we practice and prescribe to patients broadly should be based on evidence, not what like we feel like. So I think that's an important slide. Now, we should remember this slide is very important because we are talking about an adolescent, and we are talking about an adolescent patient, and the adolescent patient where you want to give minimum number of medicines. Okay, so the cornerstone of treatment of adolescent patient is lifestyle modification and weight reduction. You have to explain to the patient that hyperinsulinemia is at the heart of PCOS. And then when you want to manage a PCOD patient, you have to have lifestyle intervention, because it's going to be the best thing that you're going to do more than any medicine. See, hormones may have side effects, metformin or insulin sensitizers have side effects, but a lifestyle intervention is something that you can achieve without much difficulty, though it is easier said than done. So when it comes to a young lady, you should have specific instructions regarding diet and weight reduction, and you should have a lot of targets and things that motivate young ladies, adolescents you're dealing with. Okay, yeah, you have to give them examples of how they look at role models. They're always looking at social media, and then these young ladies are they're looking at other places for inspiration. It's not our charts or our textbooks that provide inspiration to a young adolescent lady. But if you tell a young lady that this film actress X or Y, she was so obese and she had PCO, the Sara Ali Khan had PCO, Sonam Kapoor had PCO. If you talk in that language and then they fought and overcome it, then that's the way of motivating young adolescents, to bring about weight reduction and lifestyle changes. It's not about, textbook. You write a slip, on it you write your diet and give it, and you can be guaranteed the next day she'll crumple it and throw it into a dustbin. Okay. Another way of motivating young ladies nowadays is apps. See, almost all are using these mobile phones. On the mobile phones, there are different apps, weight reduction apps, diet apps. And then, the younger generation, it takes to these web applications and this thing much more than to rigid protocols or some similar things that we have to say. What do you say about diet? Everybody asks, they want to shift from rice to chapati, such sort of things. And there are 100 apps, there are 100 types of diet, hunter-gatherer diet, and all sorts of such diets are available. But we generally have a broad idea about giving patients. You have to talk about fibers are good. You should have low glycemic index among carbohydrates. Minimize starch. Take whole fruits. It's not fruit juice, or take whole fruits. Take non-starchy vegetables. Similarly, include unsaturated fatty acids. So you can give general advice to the patient. After all, it's only a low glycemic index food that is found to be beneficial, and there is no specific diet that is found to be of great help in PCOD. You should understand that. So never say no, but you have to try and tell the lady that some things you should try and avoid. So I think that's the best way out. Always is a question about exercise, and then the most practical way is 30 minutes a day to start with at least. It's difficult to have a college going girl with so much tuitions, classes, and nowadays for online classes to motivate even 30 minutes. Just ask for 30 minutes. If you're doing lifting, walking, swimming, just tell that it will be of benefit. And like Kuldeep sir said, exercises like yoga, and if you're able to motivate the ladies in that way, then that would be a wonderful thing to do. Now you said about lifestyle across the board. This is a very important slide. See, there is it's all to do with insulin resistance. It's all to do with so it's not about measuring insulin. Surrogate marker for insulin resistance is your glucose intolerance or impaired glucose tolerance. Just remember this. Many times you're confused. All these PCO patients, if you're able to do 75 gram 2-hour OGTT for non-pregnant ladies. This is for non-pregnant ladies. Just remember this: 75 gram 2-hour OGTT. A 2-hour value between 140 and 200 is impaired glucose tolerance. Impaired glucose tolerance is a surrogate marker for insulin resistance. So if you have it there, you remember. And then anything above 200, of course, is diabetes. So all these ladies who have hyperandrogenism, weight gain, and you're thinking about PCOD, do this test. I put it as a separate slide because screen the ladies for this. This is the easiest thing that you can do. And if you are able to motivate, and if you are really concerned about the patient. Yeah. Now I initially started off by detailing 3 patients. Then we'll come to those individual cases. First was this lady whom the problem that she thought about was her acne and her facial appearances, this pimples and this sort of thing. Appearances matter. Okay. Now here in this type of ladies, 2 points. Okay. Hyperandrogenism or hirsutism, features of hyperandrogenism, think hirsutism, acne, androgenic alopecia involving the crown and not the frontal hairline, male pattern of hair growth. But remember, it's not different. It's different from virilization. Virilization will have different features. It will have temporal balding, hoarseness of voice, breast atrophy, and clitomegaly, which is not seen in PCO. So don't confuse the two, and then learn to spot the odd one out. Occasionally, you think everything is hirsutism, but if you see virilization, features of virilization, think differently. Okay. Now here for ladies, looks matter. Okay. So principles of management, that even before you start management, you have to tell the patient that it takes some time. It's not that you take the medicines and go away home and then the next day the problem is solved. When you're looking at hirsutism, you're looking at a lady who's not seeking fertility. Automatically it boils down and comes that unless contraindicated, the OCP or the combined oral contraceptive pill is the drug of choice, and the androgen is the second drug of choice. Okay. What is a combined oral contraceptive pill? It has an estrogen component and it has a progesterone component. I just kept a slide here because just to recall for you that the levels at which they act, both of them together decrease the LH. Decrease LH means decrease secretion of androgen. It increases the estrogen component is the one which increases the sex hormone binding globulin, and again it will increase binding of testosterone, and the progestin component also has actions. Okay, you have cyprotein and this thing at different levels, the actions are there. So your combined oral contraceptive pill is the best bet for treatment of your hirsutism. Now look at these. These are things. Don't think too much. The low risk COCP preparation should be recommended. Low risk, low dose. See, the international guideline says that the COCP with 35 microgram of ethinyl estradiol and cyproterone should not be used as a first line therapy. See, generally it's our first line always when we are thinking about a cyproterone. The international guideline says that it is not, but 30 microgram ethinyl estradiol with LNG, norepinephrine or norgestimate has lower risk. So the lower risk will be the 30 microgram one, not the 35 microgram with cyproterone. Okay. Having said that, now we are practicing in India and we should know this, this is the consensus statement on the use of oral contraceptive pills in PCOS women in India. That's by the PCOS Society, and which was released in 2018. And then here it clearly defines that in an adolescent, you should avoid for acne within 2 years of menarche. It is preferable to use drospirenone and norgestimate norethindrone for acne. In the Indian context, it says that in Indian context, the OCPs containing cyproterone or drospirenone, both of them may be used for treatment of hirsutism. And OCPs are, when it comes to menorrhagia, first and second generation progestins to control the bleeding. And once it's controlled, then you go to the third and fourth generation. So you see, just sum it up. When it comes for acne, you can use all drospirenone, norgestimate, norethindrone, any. When it comes to irregular hirsutism, you can even use cyproterone. But many of the people vouch that cyproterone is the one that gives you better results. But then the international guideline says that that's not the case. You can use any. So this is how the Indian guideline differs. Now, what about anti-androgens? Now you have your flutamide, spironolactone. You should remember that anti-androgens should be used only after the COCP, oral contraceptive therapy, has failed to improve symptoms. Okay, has failed to improve symptoms. And if you're using it, then monitor LFT, potassium, and renal function regularly. So remember, it's the second line. It's not the first line. Okay, just to sum up that recommendations, exclude potentially serious causes. Pharmaceutical lifestyle changes said, OCP is first indicated. Local creams could be used, but then they have limited action. And then in obese women, you can have that. And then if the lady has any remote chance of conception, you should add contraception. Now that was a lady with acne. Now the second presentation comes from a lady whose problem is just about irregular cycles. Okay, her problem is not acne. This one's cycle was regular, it has become irregular. Okay, so to regulate menstrual cycles, prolonged periods of amenorrhea, how many periods should a lady get? See, it's always a concern. The mother will tell you that she's getting period once in 45 days, once in 60 days. The RCOG green top guidelines clearly say that it's 4 menstrual cycles per year. 4 menstrual cycles per year to prevent endometrial hyperplasia. The concern is endometrial hyperplasia, that prolonged action of estrogen without progesterone is going to give endometrial hyperplasia. So to bring about withdrawal, bleeding, and menses, you can use cyclical progesterone. The choice is medroxyprogesterone 10 milligram daily for 10 to 12 days per month, or you can use a combined oral contraceptive, which is of course often touted as the best option in adolescents. So the last line is the one which is very important for patient counseling. That is 4 menstrual cycles per year. Okay. Now this is a third case which we're describing is a lady who was going, everything was well. She was having sport activity and all these things. And then she suddenly gained weight. Okay. She suddenly gained weight, and then she's got this acanthosis nigricans and this sort of symptoms, which are again surrogate markers for great degree of insulin resistance. Here the weight loss is a problem. Then she's got all symptoms, and then this lady is at the highest risk for comorbidities. She's at the highest risk for developing cardiovascular, diabetes, and such sort of complications. So this lady, obesity. Now, when you come to obesity in PCOS, again, this picture is very important. That it's a normal waist hip ratio less than 8. That's pear-shaped obesity. But in PCOS, if you assess the patient properly, the fat distribution is more central, and then there is evidence by a high waist hip ratio. It's the apples and not the pears. Okay, it's the apple that's type of obesity that's more seen in these cases of your PCOS and in adolescent PCOS. Okay, these are a few theoretical things, but this you need to remember that in PCOS there's leptin resistance, and abnormality of leptin secretion predisposes to weight gain to these ladies, and then it's insulin resistance and leptin resistance. Okay, so these two things overlap, and obesity which is there. So here in this group of patients, management of insulin resistance and insulin sensitizers, here is where the role comes. In the other two, I was never speaking about metformin, but here is a case where just come for your use of metformin. Okay. And in these patients, again, they are prone for what is called metabolic syndrome. Metabolic syndrome, there are criteria. Because it's a discussion on PCOS, I think we won't go. But you have to remember, when you think about an obese PCOD patient with acanthosis nigricans, which is even though she's an adolescent, you have to think in terms of this metabolic syndrome. Okay. And then here again, like I said, the things that I said earlier, the lifestyle modifications, dietary modifications, and the addition of sensitizers become very important. Okay. Weight reduction, you have to emphasize to the patient in this category. And then you have to 5 to 10% reduction of weight gives results in restoration of menstruation, ovulation. Very important to understand. It's not the big thing that you have to do. See, a lady who is 80 kilograms has to reduce around 8 kilos, and reducing 8 kilos, I think it's much more realistic than telling 80 kg young lady to say that you become 65 kilos, and that looks like a mountain to climb. But if you change your language, and if you're able to say about this 5 to 10%, then it may be more effective to counsel the patient. And then weight loss, what does it do? It increases your sex hormone binding globulin, decreases your testosterone. So as you lose weight, even the hyperandrogenism, the hirsutism decreases, your menstrual conception improves, and further, if you carry it on, then it's related to your fertility also. Now, when it comes to your thought about metformin, that is this group where metformin, then it could be considered if it improves your testosterone levels, improves BMI, not to be used alone, but it could be considered as to be combined with COCP in adolescents with PCOS if the BMI is more, and where the COCP and the lifestyle changes do not achieve the desired goals. Okay. Now the next question, and probably the last question, you are aggressively diagnosing PCOS and you're trying to treat these patients. What is the risk that these patients have, and is it a meaningful intervention, and is the window really meaningful? That what are you going to gain by diagnosing at such early starting your treatment? Yeah, it is a really a meaningful intervention. You have to intervene in these things. If you think that if you think that she's insulin resistant, then you have to do a GTT, find out if she's insulin resistant, and considering her cardiovascular and metabolic risks. A timely diagnosis is very important, and interventions are important because it improves hirsutism, ovulation, quality of life, lipid profiles, and all these things. Then comes the prevention of gestational diabetes. You have to of diabetes mellitus. So you have to counsel these patients that it's only when you intervene at this stage, at the adolescent stage, with different medicines and drugs, insulin sensitizers, lifestyle modifications, it's only then that you can reduce the possibility of having diabetes mellitus later, or maybe even gestational diabetes mellitus when you become pregnant. Then the other thing is the cardiovascular disease. These patients, they are at risk for cardiovascular disease. They have a risk for hyperlipidemia, cardiovascular disease. So you have to counsel and intervene as appropriately required. Similarly, I said about endometrial cancers. All these things, risks have to be explained to the patient and have to be appropriately counseled. To summarize what I was saying about adolescent PCOS, first point, correct diagnosis is of paramount importance. Following diagnosis, anxiety and depression are very common. We have to deal with them because it's part of treatment. You have to talk to the patients about multi-component lifestyle interventions, which are the mainstay of treatment. Very important, and I think you cannot just not emphasize the importance of lifestyle interventions. Then COCPs are the backbone, and they are the mainstay to manage cycle irregularities and hyperandrogenism. Metformin is to be considered, but in a select group of patients. In obese PCO, where you're thinking in terms of comorbidities, where you're thinking about glucose intolerance, impaired glucose tolerance, those are the groups for metformin. Alone using metformin for weight loss, I think that we should learn to find better ways to motivate young adolescent girls to lose weight. Though metformin has been shown in studies to induce weight loss, but then that should not be the first. And most importantly, then there is a need for proper transition from adolescent to adult care. And to do that proper transition, I think we need to understand the diagnosis and the approach to a patient with adolescent PCOS very well. It's very challenging, but I request you to consider the challenge. So thank you very much for the chance to make this presentation, and I hope that whatever little bit time you spent heard me was worth your morning well spent. Thank you very much, Kunjumari and Abdul Wahab, for that.
Thank you, Dr. Venu, for that wonderful lecture. I think it was so useful to all the people who are listening, because it's a very difficult topic. Especially we all come across on lot many occasions. Anything? No, we all come across on lot many occasions with regard to all these factors of acne, estrogen, adolescent girl coming into our OP. But very often we advise some medicine, some progesterones or something, and then we send these patients. We just send these patients with some progesterones or some occipils without investigating further. So I feel it is always very important to evaluate these patients and give proper treatment. So in this background, we have few questions. One question is, lean patient, lean girl with recurrent acne problems, no evidence, biochemical evidence of androgenism. Vanu, you can listen, you can hear?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Yes.
Yeah. Lean PCOS with only complaining of acne, which is not subsiding with any of the cosmetic treatments or anything, came for evaluation. And there is no evidence of biochemical hyperandrogenism, but she has irregular cycles. How to proceed?
See, any patient, even though she is lean, I think the emphasis on lifestyle interventions should be there. The diet and this, I think that should stay at foremost. The diet, physical activity, and then because she has irregular cycles, I would start her if the acne is severe, then I am not responding to any other form of treatment. You have to understand that it is a matter of concern for the adolescent girl, so I won't hesitate to start a combined oral contraceptive pill with low dosage, least dosage. I have no particular affinity for cyproterine containing or drospirenone containing, but generally I write a drospirenone containing low dose oral contraceptive pill.
Okay, so if she is not having hyperandrogenism and if she is not responding to conventional low dose OC pills, is it justifiable to start the contraceptives which contains anti-androgens, cyproterine or anything?
You can start, or you can add an anti-androgen. See, you can add an anti-androgen to these patients, like spironolactone or finasteride. Many often there is addition of those kind of things. The only thing you have to monitor for LFTs and all these things. And then young girl, you don't expect her to become pregnant, so you can add. There's no problem.
And another question is, one patient came with a history, means with persistent acne, along with lots of skin tags. So does it have any implication as a symptom or a sign of hyperandrogenism or hyperinsulinemia or anything?
No, see, if you severe acne or this thing, skin tags, I am not so. I think you need a dermatology consultation also, because for that.
No, the question is there any correlation between this presence of skin tags and hyperandrogenism?
Oh, that I've not.
No. Nothing.
Type comedones and acne, inflammation can be there, but skin tags.
No, excess presence of skin tags. The question is very specific by the attendee. Excessive presence of skin tags with hyperinsulinemia.
Oh, is it?
No, I don't know whether I'm just asking. This question is like that. Okay. Then you have lots of appreciations from different delegates regarding the talks. And then one question is there any need of involving the dietitian for the combined management of these type of patients? Venu, is there any need of a dietitian?
Yeah, can you hear me? Yeah. If you have the luxury and convenience of a dietitian around, it does make a difference because the dietitian gives the prescribed diet and follows up on it, which many a times as busy practitioners and clinicians, the follow-up part of that thing we lose out on. See, first time a patient comes to our OPD, we make it a point to explain dietary principles to them. That's all right. But if you have a dietitian, then as part of their profession, they keep a follow-up. Patient keeps a book. So if you have the luxury of having a dietitian, I think it's not a bad idea. It's a good idea.
And what is the dose and duration of finasteride for his use?
See, finasteride using 2.5 to 5. Finast is available, and that Finast is for 3 months, I think 5 milligrams a day, 2.5 to 5 milligram dosage. To tell you the truth, I haven't used it much, but yeah, finasteride, 5 milligrams per day. 5 milligrams per day of finasteride for 3 months.
And how long the combined OCP can be continued safely?
If you look at the trials regarding the safety of combined OC pills, most of the trials have lasted for 6 months. Okay, there is only one which has assessed the safety profile for 24 months. So I think in an adolescent girl, once you start an oral contraceptive pill, you call her back after 1 or 2 cycles and assess her tolerability and look if she tolerates it well. And if she's going well within the safety profiles, for a young girl, there's no harm in continuing it up to say a year or 2 years. I think there should not be a problem because some of these PCOS patients, you have to continue it for long. So,
and
generally I put for 6 months. Then I would stop the OCP and try to see that if she suffices with progesterone withdrawal. That's what I do. What I do is I give it for 3 to 6 months. Then if menstrual complaints are a problem, then I taper her off and try to put her on progesterone for the last 10 days of the cycle. If that works well, then I won't continue the OCP forever.
Wahab, anything?
So there's a question on YouTube also. Can I read that, sir?
Yeah, proceed.
Okay, this is a question, this is a case regarding, they had mentioned a role of laparoscopic ovarian drilling in 22 years old who is obese, unmarried, with irregular cycles. Then they are mentioning, will it improve obstetric outcome 8 years later when she get married? So this
answer is the question is rubbish and should not be entertained in an unmarried girl. To do a laparoscopic intervention to improve obstetric outcome is ridiculous. And I think this take-home message should be that such question is unwarranted as much as the intervention is unwarranted. Now, where to do is in a different subset of patients. I think Kuldeep Jain sir touched on it. It's only in patients who have infertility. It's considered. So, ovarian drilling is considered in patients who have infertility in a third sequence. That is, you give oral ovulagens, then you give injectables. If they don't work, then you think of laparoscopy before proceeding to IVF in a young patient who has adequate ovarian reserve. And then the patients who benefit from laparoscopic ovarian drilling are patients with infertility who have hypersecretion of LH, okay, who have hypersecretion of LH and who are lean PCOS. Unfortunately, the obese PCOS are not the ones who seem to benefit so much from it. So I think that question should be addressed in that context and should not be discussed along with adolescent PCOS. So here there is no role.
So there is a there is a question. Sometimes we used to get the patients which actually BMI very high and in 20s and unmarried, and they never used to respond to many drugs combinations. So can we even think of ovulation induction, even think of some other combinations, because they are just going to get married? Such patients, very obese and totally resistant patients.
Yes, for ovulation induction in obese patients who are resistant to treatment, to weight loss. Is it? Wahab,
No. I just suggested. Means I am just adding to whatever what you told in your presentation.
I will tell you something that many a times optimally we suggest to patients that it's good that you lose weight. Then you do this, you do that, and then the patients don't, they don't budge a bit. In fact, the next time they come to you, they will have increased 1 kilo of weight. Generally, that is the sequence of events that happens in PCOS. Very difficult to get weight loss. And now if fertility is on their plate, see, initially you try and counsel the patient that with high BMI, trying to become pregnant is not a very good idea because of the thing. But then if they don't respond, absolutely it's not a no. You do try and go ahead, because many of the ladies, they insist on ovulation induction. And then now, even because the BMI is high, you should go have ovulation induction step by step. You should start with your tablets, because some patients with very high antral follicle counts, very high BMI, simple letrozole or clomiphene does help. If it doesn't help, then you proceed with gonadotropin. So I think standard ovulation induction protocols should apply, but you should be have counsel the patient adequately that becoming pregnant is not such a good idea with high BMI.
And here is a patient, adolescent patient, means now she is 19 years age. She was taking OC pills with drospirenone based ones before marriage. Now she got married and she wants to conceive immediately. So when she can conceive after stopping this drospirenone containing OC pills, and how long that gap should be for a safe conception without any effect on fetus?
No, I generally like to give a washout period of around 3 months. So 2 or 3 months I generally give. 3.
And if she happens to conceive while on OCP, anything specific to be done or anything to be counseled? Any teratogenic effects of drospirenone?
No, if she conceives, then you have to do the regular screening for her 3 months and 5 months. Just because she was on OCP and then she conceived immediately after that, we don't have any specific advice for termination or anything. We ask to continue the pregnancy, do a good 11 to 14 week scan, good anomaly scan, and then proceed accordingly. I don't.
And nowadays, it's a very common thing that this adolescent PCO patients, sometimes they come with endometriotic cyst as well. They come complaining of severe dysmenorrhea. And when we look, there will be small cysts. I think that also has to be addressed.
Yeah, hyperhistaminic conditions often overlap. And I think, yes, that's a common observation that this both together, I agree.
Anyway, with that, we will conclude today's session on demystifying PCOS. I think both the excellent speakers, they have demystified the issue very effectively. I think tomorrow onwards, you can have a clear-cut practice guidelines on these two hot topics in PCOS. And also the recording will be available for the society members. And congrats, Dr. Venu, for that wonderful and excellent presentation. I think everybody has enjoyed. A lot of appreciation messages are pouring in for both the speakers.
Thank you.
To the society members, please contribute generously for the publication on environmental magazine, as well as the forthcoming entertainment program, E-Lion, that is going to happen on 12th July. And we are going to have our annual conference, as I mentioned, on 8th and 9th of August. And that will be first of its kind in any of these societies, I believe. And thank you so much. Thank you for the patient hearing. Wahab, you can conclude.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Dr. Venugopal and Kuldeep Jain sir, for your wonderful presentation. And thanks for all the participants and other viewers in internet and in YouTube. So I think this presentation have you in your clinical practice. So it was short and actually precise and informative. And many of your doubts, I am sure it's cleared. And once again, thanks for all for your wonderful participation. Thank you.
And a big thanks to Samarth Life Sciences, who have facilitated this meeting, the technical team behind Mr. Anil Bajaj, the technical person behind this venture. Thank you all, and thank you, Sonal, also. Thank you, Kuldeep sir, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. On behalf of Samarth also, we thank you very much, sir, and we'll continue to look forward.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank
Thanks.
you. Bye.